There's people fighting to get in. I hope that's a good sign. Uh, Thank you so much for being here. I hope you enjoyed the previous sessions. I know it's been a long day, but we're going to switch gears a little bit here. We'll be talking about technology. We'll be looking at technology, and hopefully we'll be understanding a few new aspects of how technology behaves. It's going to be a very mixed session. It's going to be a bit of slides, a bit of interactive, and as you've sure have noticed, there are cards on your tables. If you could leave them for the next 25 minutes or so. I know a few of you haven't resisted opening the boxes, but please put them back, and I promise we'll get back to them. If you've already taken the box and put it in your bag, please put it back on the table before anyone notices, and we'll take it from here. So greetings. Thank you again so much for your attention. My name is Michel Zappa. I'm a self-proclaimed futurist. I gave myself that title a while ago because I quite enjoy making predictions about what's going to happen. And I figured that since I was doing that over and over again, sort of trying to assess and trying to guess what's going on, I might as well give myself that title. And I study technology. I try to make sense of technology. I try to see what's going on, and I try to interpret what might come next. So it's a particular brand of futurism that is geared towards emerging technology. So everything you will see here today is about technology. We'll be looking at fintech in particular, but keep in mind that everything we discuss applies to technology in general. We tend to think about technology in terms of its artifacts, in terms of the devices and the gadgets that we carry, everything we need to charge, everything that crashes, everything that needs software updates. All of those things are technological, obviously. But these are not the only things that are technological. This is the mental image we have. This is literally a Google search for technology. So this is the mental image that we might conjure when we think about technology. But in fact, technology is so much more than that. Technology is everything that surrounds us. Everything we've built, everything we've made, everything we've created is technological. Everything that is not natural is technological. So our human species, our society creates all of these contraptions, things like harnessing fire, things like agriculture, the way we've reshaped the earth. These are technological in nature. Writing is a technology. Money is obviously a technology. And it's important to bring this up because technology follows certain patterns. And we'll be talking a lot about these patterns today. And technology has a certain behavior. So when you think about the iPhone that becomes faster and faster every year, you have to keep in mind that the same rules that define the speeding up of the phone also applies to the way that agriculture is changing and the way we're communicating differently. Everything we create, everything we make is technological. And if this is true, this also means that all companies are technology companies. Some people are more surprised by this than others. I know that in fintech, there is a close association to technology because it's so reliant upon IT infrastructure. But again, keep in mind, this is true for all companies. Every type of organization relies on technology to do what it does. And the theoretical bit today will circle around technological principles. We're going to talk about 5 different principles, 5 rules that somewhat define how technology behaves over time. And I find this important because when we see technologies progressing, when we see them changing and appearing in our lives, we oftentimes get caught up with the artifacts. We see the things that change very rapidly and many times feel out of control. But the principles that we'll be discussing, they're longitudinal. They are true over long periods of time. So they're a way of anchoring your thoughts as we look into what's happening in the future. We'll discuss each one of these 5 principles one by one, and we'll start with the idea of unintended consequences. It's probably the most counterintuitive aspect of technology, and also one of the ones that are most deeply ingrained in how technology behaves. So what are unintended consequences? So when the car was invented a little over a century ago, we could somewhat foresee how a faster horse would affect us, right? We'd get around a little bit quicker, There would be less manure on the streets. So we could somewhat see the effects that the car would have on society or on our behaviors. But we can only see so far into the future, because what the car ends up doing is this. It's an actual photo. So we could foresee the car, but we cannot foresee the traffic jam. And that's what I mean by unintended consequences. Technology brings upon these changes that are not obvious. We can see the first order effects, but we can rarely see the second, third, and fourth order effect that technology will bring. And again, this is true for largely all technologies. Everything that has a deep effect on society ends up having these second, third, fourth order effects. The reason for this, and I do apologize because there is a word that you might not be seeing, but the yellow line, which says expectations, is linear, because our expectations of the world are largely linear. We're used to living in a linear world, where we can project things to quite an extent. The word you're not seeing is reality, which is the white line, and it shows exponential growth. And we'll talk a little bit more about exponential growth in a bit. But what I hope to prove by this very high-level graph is, while our expectations of the world and our expectations of technology are largely linear, the reality, in fact, is exponential. It changes way beyond what we expect. Another way of putting this is that we tend to overestimate the short-term effects of technology, and we tend to underestimate the long-term effects. So in the short run, expectations are actually higher than what happens. But in the long run, we sort of forget about it, and the world ends up changing way more than we had expected. Does that make sense? Excellent. Another example of this, Another example of this are elevators. So again, 2 centuries ago when we invented elevators, it was kind of obvious that, you could take us up to the 3rd floor, because we didn't really have buildings that were much taller than that. But the 2nd, 3rd, 4th order effects of the elevator is urbanization, high rises. Again, counterintuitive. It's all there when you look at it in retrospect, but it's kind of hard to see when you're sitting here, when you're looking into the future. So the principle of unintended consequences is fundamental. It's deeply ingrained in how technology behaves and what it does, and it's the kind of pattern you have to keep in mind when thinking about what's likely to happen. The second principle, we've already briefly mentioned this, but it's hugely important in how we look at technology, is exponential change. We hear a lot about this. So what happens is technologies evolve over time. You can take pretty much any given piece of technology, any technological artifact, and given enough research, you can see the history that led up to the point where it is now. You can do this for writing. The Kindle is a great example. You can do this for medical imaging, a technology that we barely had a century ago. Now we can look into the body in real time without killing the patient. It's a pretty big deal. Flight, again, 120, 130 years old. These are all recent, given the span of society, these are all recent developments. And they all follow this principle of exponential change, where technology builds on itself to make things go faster and faster. The largest driver of this is obviously information technology, microprocessors, transistors. The photo on the left used to be a computer. The photo on the right is a computer nowadays. The article that accompanies the photo on the right, you can see that it's a coin. The article that accompanies it in Wired starts out by talking about how sometimes the researchers will drop the computers on the floor and simply not bother finding them because they're too small. And it's an actual computer that probably does a lot more than the one on the left did. This is what exponential change looks like. We might have heard the name Moore's Law, or Moore's observation, more specifically. So Gordon Moore, one of the co-founders of Intel, noticed in the 60s that their devices were getting twice as fast every cycle, every 18 months or so. Or in other words, they were getting twice as affordable every cycle. This does not happen in any other industry. You don't often see things getting twice as affordable every year and a half. The reasons behind this are largely complex and related to the way that technology builds on itself, but the end result is things get faster over time. One way of putting it is things get faster. and things also get cheaper faster. And we keep seeing the exponential growth curve everywhere we look, especially with regards to information technology. There's a lot of talk about Moore's law hitting some kind of limit. This observation has been done for the past decades. It still hasn't been true. I'm sure it's going to be true at some point. We still haven't reached that point. So keep in mind, when we look at technology, keep in mind that whatever you're seeing now is likely to be 10 times more affordable or 10 times faster in 5 years, or 100 times in 10 years. I like to say that everything is accelerating. Everything is speeding up. The amount of decisions we have to make are increasing. The amount of information we have to process is increasing. The amount of things we have to deal with as a direct consequence of technology is increasing. Everything is accelerating. And if everything is accelerating, it means that today is effectively the slowest day you'll ever live through. Tomorrow will be faster. If this bothers you, keep in mind this is true for everyone, not only for yourself. It takes a while to get used to this idea. I don't think things are going to go back, at least not at the pace at which we're progressing now. It seems as if things will keep moving in this direction. There's very little evidence on the contrary. So everything is speeding up. Everything is accelerating. What does that mean for us? Well, we'll see. The third principle is one where science fiction oftentimes becomes science fact. We've seen this. I'll explore what this idea means a little bit. But largely speaking, every technology begins as an idea. Every technology we have, every technology that exists around us right now began as an idea at some point. This is true for vacuum cleaners. You have to extend your imagination a little bit, but the principle remains true. Jetsons effectively foresaw the Roomba or the Dyson. It's not as chatty as Rosie, but that might be a good thing. We see this in other places. On the left is the replicator from Star Trek. On the right is just about any 3D printer. Again, it's the principle that matters. The left is a television image generated, for entertainment purposes, but it inspired the thing on the right. It inspired a whole generation of people thinking differently about what is possible with technology, and then sort of going out of their way to create that which they saw on TV or in movies to make that real, possible. We see this in a lot of places. Back to the Future is a great example. The photo, the clip on the right is an actual hoverboard. It's still super expensive. It only works in very controlled environments. It's still a prototype. But functionally speaking, science fact has caught up with that which was science fiction only 30 years ago. And if you don't believe that, here's another example from the same film. The self-lacing sneakers by Nike. Well, they're coming out next month. Nike tried really hard to get them out in October last year when, the official date that they traveled to in the film. But I think this is actually the cover story at Wired this month are the self-lacing sneakers from Nike. So science fiction, many, many times, instructs what happens in real life. So it's important to be a geek and pay attention to these things. And with that in mind, I want to talk to you a little bit about some research that we've done, that we've prepared for you guys, and that went live only a few hours ago on the web, which is directly related to the idea of science fiction becoming science fact. Because this principle, we're going to stop the principles for a bit, talk about the research, then we'll come back to the principles. But the principles of science fiction becoming science fact is something that instructs the way I think, and therefore the way that my organization performs research. So a bit of backstory. In 2012, we produced some research for Innotribe in Osaka, looking at the future of financial technologies. I've been doing research into technology at large since 2010 approximately. So we did this. We started talking about cryptocurrencies and started talking about how technology is affecting financial services. This was 4 years ago. 2 years ago, we produced a report and visualization. There we go. A report and visualization about how technology is disintermediating processes and the effect that it has, again, on money and financial services. And this year, we prepared something a little bit different. So in 2016, with the principle of science fiction becoming science fact in mind, we've gone about things a little bit differently. So first an example of how it's difficult to tell sci-fi from sci-fact. This is an article from a few days ago, Motherboard. This group is attempting to put satellites with CPUs or GPUs in them in space, because that's the most efficient way of securing cryptocurrencies. It's unhackable because they're sealed off from the actual planet. And it's an idea that is fully viable. It's sci-fi, but it's already a technology. Nobody's done it yet, but it's already in the research. It's already pointing the way of what might become possible. It might be the safest way of storing cryptocurrencies. Who knows? It reads like sci-fi, and that's exactly the point. So whether this comes true in the next few years or not, we'll see. But the principle that ideas, sci-fi ideas, instruct what happens in reality, that's the piece you should be paying attention to. We have devised a way of measuring this invisible line between idea and reality. We have a model which I'll show what it looks like, that essentially draws a line, which says that an idea evolves into a concept evolves into a prototype, and a prototype eventually evolves into a product. This does not mean that every idea becomes a product, because obviously ideas dissipate and disappear, some concepts prove impossible, etc. But it does mean that every product begins as an idea. We've established a metric for how to measure this. It's a very simple model that evaluates technologies on 5 different vectors. Each vector is related to a factor through which how technology changes over time. For example, viability. Is the technology feasible within the laws of physics? It's a really good question, because that's not necessarily true for all technologies. Some technologies are dreamt up before they're feasible. Teleportation, for example. Question 2, demonstrability. Has it been proven to work? You get a low score if it kind of sort of works a little bit. You get a high score if it works consistently as it was designed to. You cannot see this, but there are other questions related to desirability. Do people want this? There's another question related to investment. Are people investing in it? And finally, competition. If you're the only guy doing something in a garage, it's possible, well, it's likely that the technology isn't that developed yet. On the contrary, you get a really high score if there's, say, a thriving ecosystem of companies, organizations trying to build this technology. So again, it's a simple model that assesses, or that helps assess the rate of readiness for any given piece of tech. You can find the full point scores on site. You can find the site on the cards. We'll get back to that later. But as an example of what we've come up with, so we've tracked more than 128 technologies in the fintech space in the research that you'll see. And here are some examples of where these technologies land on the graph. So things like quantum cash, currencies based on quantum computing, well, they're still in the idea phase. Same things with adaptable production, the idea that 3D printers are spread out across the world and you no longer have to distribute things. That's still in the idea phase. Something like DIY cryptocurrencies, existing in the Ethereum realm, those are in the concept phase. Insurance telematics, they're starting to develop, becoming prototypes. In the product phase, you have things like AI advisors, which already exist as products. You have things like chat UIs, advisors baked into to messaging applications. These are actual products. All these cards All these technologies exist in the research, and they've all gone through the same process of being asked the same questions by a group of people with varied backgrounds. And this is how they spread out. These are the scores. These are the approximate scores they receive. The research has been organized into 6 top-level categories. So we look at advice, we look at artificial intelligence / machine learning, we look at security in all of its shapes and forms. We look at what we call cryptonomies, which are the new economies, the crypto-based economies. We look at insurance at large, and we look at transactions. Yeah, and these are arbitrary ways of organizing the technologies. They can be shuffled in any order. The research itself has over 120 technologies, hundreds of organizations attached to them, hundreds of attachments, thousands of data points. And it looks like this. Let's switch. Here we go. So the address that you have at the back of the cards will take you here. And this is a visualization tool that we developed to showcase the research, where every point on the graph corresponds to a technology. The distance from the center, it's a bit hard to read here, but if you can make it out, you'll see that it says idea out here, then it says concept, it says prototype and product. In other words, the scale, or rather the distance from the center corresponds to the imaginary line we talked about earlier. Each point on the map corresponds to a distinct technology. So here we have the peer economy, which is highly developed. You'll see that it has a lot of dots next to it, which means that over here, I mean, this tool is made for you guys to explore, so it doesn't really work when I do it here. And I invite all of you to check it out. But you'll see here on the right-hand side, sort of all the companies that we've identified. It's not an exhaustive list, but all the companies we've identified that work in the peer economy are listed here. I'm sure there's a bunch of others, but it's to prove a point. For each technology, we've done that. So we have peer lending, which has a full readiness score. We break down the score. You'll see that it too has a bunch of related organizations. And so it goes. Circles mean organizations, triangles mean attachments. An attachment is further reading, so we might relate it to a TED Talk, we might relate it to a patent application. It's for further reading on the web. All of this is free, open, publicly available. And with the research, or with the tool rather, you can do things like, you can organize the whole visual, let's say, you can organize the whole thing by readiness score, for example. So you can see things here on the trailing edge. You can still see that it says idea here. So the lowest scores, again, quantum cash, really low score. I mean, it's barely viable. It hasn't really been demonstrated to work. But there's competition. There are attempts to do this. Low scores, behavioral money. So money that knows how you behave and sort of anticipates your needs. Still in the idea phase. The orchestrated economy, where everything works on its own without our help. That's fortunately still in the idea phase. Otherwise, you wouldn't need us. Drone insurance, I'm sure that's coming. So these are the lower scores. Likewise, here are the higher scores, things that we have seen. So online-only insurance companies, we have a bunch of those. Open data analytics, we have a lot of those as well. The quantified self, huge movement. So each technology that we've identified has gone through the same evaluation process, and we've generated these scores based on the methodology. The technologies have been related to one another, so there are connections, there's further reading. You can navigate the whole thing by category. So if you do, here at the bottom, we can do things like click on the security thing and see only security technologies. So there's a bunch of ways of organizing and navigating the content. So again, this tool is what you'll see if you go through URL on the cards. Don't open the box of cards quite yet. You'll have more time to do that later. Any questions so far? Yes. Hold on. Roving microphone. Yeah, please stop me, because otherwise I'll just ramble.
Hi, Michelle. Tony Brady, BNY Mellon. So you talked about the principle of unintended consequences and exponential change. To some degree, that's a little frightening, right? Because what you read about AI, as an example, I mean, is there any controlling this process? Because, you know, to your point about unintended consequences, can some technology take over something that we don't want it to take over?
So the bad news is that nobody's in charge. The good news is that nobody's in charge as well. So it's up to us to actually make better decisions with regards to technology. When we talk about AI, there are a lot of really smart people who are starting to alert the rest of the population as to what might become possible in terms of the effects of AI. Nobody knows where this is going to end up, and nobody's in control of what's happening. There are pockets of development. There are universities. There are companies. There are lone actors developing these things. It's still low on the possibility index of actually doing real damage for now. But as we know, these things change really quickly, especially when you combine unintended consequences with exponential growth. That becomes a very dangerous combination. So the suggestion that I have is pay attention to what's going on and make better decisions to the best of your capacity, be it as a consumer, where you vote with your wallet and you purchase the technologies that seem most appropriate to our needs, but also as investors and sort of trying to understand the actual consequences of what is going on, because we are the ones collectively making these decisions. Any more questions before we go on? No questions? You're all scared? OK, good. So we'll move back to the slides. Again, this visualization is fully free. It's online. You can find it. We've covered hundreds of startups in the data set. It's just a sample. I mean, we know this is not complete. We've produced this as a sort of a spearhead or a pilot of what is possible. The visualization tool is extensible, so we can plug in more technologies as they come in. It's updatable, so we can update the scores as technologies progress. And if you feel that something is missing, you will find a feedback button, and it will send an email that I will see, and we'll make sure that whatever content is missing or wrong will be fixed or included. So this is just a small sample of what's out there. On the back end, we're building a database of all technologies. So we are attempting to build a platform that tracks every publicly available emerging technology that is out there, with readiness scores, with attachments, with organizations. We already have technologies in the defense space, fintech, and the agriculture space. There is a phenomenon in emerging tech, which is that the technologies don't obey geography or industry. So technology might pop up in the payment space and then jump over to, I don't know, space exploration, where technology might pop up in energy and then jump over to health. The same technology can coexist in several industries. They don't obey geography. They can be replicated easily. This is true for technologies. They're really hard to contain, going back to the AI point. In other words, what we're trying to do is we're trying to identify all technologies and then do these industry reads on top of it, such as what we're doing with fintech right now. But our objective is to build an open database, a publicly accessible database of all technologies that is being developed. We call it cryptonomy. It's short for the cryptographic economy. Again, it's on the cards. It's easy to find online. And it's hopefully an example of what we talked about with how science fiction becomes science fact. It's one of the the guiding principles of how we've designed this tool and the methodology behind it is to show people that even though something is an idea right now, if you blink, it can become a product, or at least a concept. With that in mind, we're going to move on to the next principle, and we're going to start doing some interactive work as well with your cards. You'll finally get to open your boxes in a few minutes. So we're going to talk a little bit about the fourth principle. We talked about unintended consequences. We talked about exponential change. We talked about sci-fi becoming sci-fact. Now we're going to talk about combinatorial evolution. And combinatorial evolution is a principle developed by a fellow called Brian W. Arthur, who studies technology in a book called The Nature of Technology. And it basically says that all technologies, every single technology, is a combination of other technologies that came before it. So if you take something as ubiquitous as the smartphone, and if you break it down into its core components, you'll see that in order to have the smartphone, you first need to invent the touchscreen. You need a battery. You need a data signal. You need GPS, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A smartphone is the combination of all of these technologies. You can only have the smartphone, or what we call a smartphone, if you have these preceding technologies fully developed first. Well, if that's true for the smartphone, it's probably also true for everything else. So you can then take something like GPS and further break it down. So in order to have GPS, you first need to invent the satellite. You need to invent the atomic clock. You need to invent the rocket. You need to invent triangulation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So every technology is thoroughly dependent on everything that came before it. All technologies are the recombination of things that happened previously. In other words, you need the rocket to have the smartphone. It doesn't seem that way when you're using the phone, because you never really see the rockets or the satellites, because they're in space, obviously, but they're conceptually linked. And this is true in both directions of time. This is true if you look back in time, as we just did, taking something like the phone, which we're all familiar with, but it's also true if you look forward in time. It's also true when you create new technologies. And that's what we're going to do now. So on your tables, you have cards, and these cards will recombine. You saw that in the research, that all technologies are connected. And we're going to explore how to make these connections on our own. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to invent the future, or rather, we're going to predict the future by inventing it. There's this quote by Alan Kay, which I love. The best way to predict the future is to invent it. We're going to do a little bit of that with a challenge in mind. So we're going to take cards in groups of 2 or 3. I think that works on all tables, yeah. So I want you to break out in groups and get a deck per group. And first of all, I want you to introduce yourselves to your neighbor. And then after you've done that, I want you to identify a favorite card. And I'll give you 5 to 10 minutes to do that. Then we'll move to the exercise. There's a lot of information in the cards, so take a few minutes to process it. All the cards come from the research. So this was just a warm-up. Now we're going to get to the actual exercise. This was just for you to actually break out the cards and see the content that's in it. I hope you've all managed to browse them a little bit. But now we're moving on to the actual combinatorial evolution part of the challenge. So with that, so having selected a card, I now want you guys to start combining cards in your groups of 2 or 3. It doesn't have to be your favorite card. You're gonna combine cards with a specific challenge in mind. And that challenge is related to customer service. So what I want you to do is to create a new technology. This is highly abstract. And it doesn't have to be entirely realistic. That's kind of the point. So by combining approximately 2 cards per group, I want you to create a technology that doesn't exist now necessarily in order to create something that would help customer service in general. It's a broad challenge. It's not necessarily a realistic challenge, but I want you to think about how these technologies can be combined into creating something that does not yet exist. So that's your challenge. You'll have 10 minutes to do this, and then you'll be demoing this back to the group. I'll pick out a few groups to demo. Oh, there we go. So we have 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes, and we'll go to the demos. So, are we all ready? I can tell you've all wrapped up because you've all stopped talking. And for the next 5 minutes or so, we will be listening in to the best ideas in the group. So who wants to start? Oh, excellent. We have volunteers. So you guys will pitch your idea for how to solve customer service using emerging technology. So which cars did you pick?
Yes. Hi. Patrick Havender from Nordea. We picked translucent screens, and we used the peer-to-peer economy. And let me just start by saying that the idea is not fully packaged and wrapped and commercialized, just so you know. But we were thinking that in a peer-to-peer economy, 5 years from now, a customer service, there you could be pull resources from each other, from different sources that lend customer service resources depending on supply and demand in the marketplace. And that could also, if you were here earlier this morning, listening about third-party trusted advisors, that represented themselves and were selling for different companies. And we were also then thinking that if you were having no staff in a branch office or in a store or even at home and wanted advice or just some ideas on your clothing or whatever feedback, then this could be a very personalized yet non-personal way of doing customer service.
So interacting with a smart, transparent screen that knows all about you and which uses the peer-to-peer economy to pool resources.
Yes, the customer service.
Customer service, with customer service agents.
Exactly.
Very well.
Good.
Have you found an investor?
No, not yet.
Okay, look around. Who else wants to? Oh, this is convenient.
Hi.
Which technologies did you pick?
Sorry.
Which technologies did you pick?
All right. We have picked up the cryptocurrency card,
So the cryptocurrency card
and cognitive financial advice. We have a selfie pay, location as a layer, and identity insurance.
okay.
The theme what we put is for customer service, how to make it quick payment in the modern industry. So we have a customer who is actually, even if he's traveling, he was traveling or like he's going to a store. So based on the time and location, the offer is determined real time. So we use the location as a layer for that service. To make the payment, the cryptocurrency card, which is a combination of the real world digital, the currency and the digital currency, it's the same account that is linked to. The customer can make the payment using a selfie pay. If there is a connection problem, as a backup, he can use this particular card to make the payment. And always there is an identity insurance linked in back to his account, so he's always pretty safe on this particular transaction.
Excellent. So you're combining quite a few technologies, but you come up with a simple solution, apparently, to address the issue of customer service.
That's right.
Very well. I'll find someone else to demo their idea. Oh, another volunteer. So which cards have you selected?
Okay, we selected emotion recognition, morality engine, plus intention economy. And we pushed the idea to the edges here. And the rationale behind this is that if you're able to recognize the emotion of the person in the context of the morality that it has, and you can determine the intention in the economy of the person, so basically you can get right of customer service. Okay, so the idea is to not have customer service because you will have a so granular service for every individual.
Yeah.
That could be so personalized that.
So it's pre-adapted to the needs that the customers will have before they have them.
Yeah. Basically, I used to say that customer experience is what you get when you don't get what you are wanting to, right?
Yeah.
So that's.
So you eliminate the problem at the root.
Yeah.
Okay, very sci-fi, like it. One more group. Oh, lots of volunteers. Yes, sorry. Which cards did you select?
So we selected the AI banker with the voice ID security. And we're very excited about that because your AI banker is available 24/7 and can help you with all your financial needs, understands you very well. Plus, you can access your AI banker just by your voice. So you simply make the call and you start saying what you want. And in terms of customer service, there's nothing better than that.
Excellent. That's very feasible as well. It sounds realistic in a short time. More hands, one more group. Yes.
Hi, Isaac Thomas from ADCB. We actually went with an entirely, 4 or 5 technologies we used. We used the emotional recognition, which basically kind of said that if the best way to prevent fraud is to understand the emotions going through it, and also be able to understand the language of the discussions, being able to figure that through various emotions that are there, and to consummate the contract through a smart contract technology, and to be able to pay either through a selfie or a brainwave pay, and then also the actual currency being a cryptocurrency card. And so the end-to-end experience is using 4 or 5 technologies.
Wow. That too sounds very feasible. I mean, you managed to select a broad range of technologies, but it's all
Yeah.
closed one way or another.
Yeah, it actually just prevents you from, starts from end-to-end solution, which basically looks at the fraud angle, which means that the client or the person is immediately known as what exactly are his intention in the contract. They get to know the ideas through the emotional, card, and then they do the transaction without having to talk to each other through the smart contracts. So it's
Wow.
almost telepathic, but
Yeah.
that's something that we looked at.
I sense a strong theme of emotion recognition and AI, sort of trying to fix all of the people who are bothered by the experience. Very interesting. One more group before we move on. Yes.
Hi, I'm Leslie Isaac from Emirates NBD. We picked up emotion recognition, augmented reality payment, identity wearable, the VR economy, topped with cognitive financial advice. So it's a pretty vast range. The good thing we saw with emotion recognition is basically, identifying all your facial expressions and the other emotions. We can make an idea of what the customer actually wants and how he or she reacts. And through the augmented reality payment mechanism, which you wear a wearable AR device and you just see the item that you want to buy and you get all the information that you want, including price comparison, stuff like that. And if you express happiness or disappointment when you see it, immediately that information can be fed back through this emotion recognition tool. And then the identity wearable just acts on it by making the payment really easy. And the VR economy doesn't have to have the customer even leave his or her house and can do this entire experience. So we just thought the whole thing just ties in.
Very thorough. Excellent. I sensed another theme, which is nobody listened to the instructions of 2 cards, so that's beside the point. Let's move back to the slides, please, and we're going to talk about one more principle, then we have one more exercise, and we'll be out of here on time. So thank you so much for that. Very insightful. I like how the ideas sort of congregated around a few themes, not only the card selection, but sort of the frustrations, the emotions, the AI making decisions for us. I'm sure that's due to happen in the near future. I love this quote. When experts are wrong, it's often because they're experts on an earlier version of the world. I'm going to let that sink in for a bit. That's Paul Graham, sorry. Paul Graham from Y Combinator, ex-Y Combinator. We're going to move on to my favorite principles of the 5. And it's the idea of centaurs. We've all heard about unicorns. We'll be talking mythical animals here for the next few minutes. So we've all heard about unicorns. For those who don't remember, for a while, these were really unicorns were sort of the startups that were worth $1 billion before IPO, and sort of it became a term to refer to highly successful startups that managed to leverage a lot of success in a short amount of time. But I don't find unicorns that interesting. I find centaurs a lot more interesting. So what's a centaur? I'll tell a bit of a backstory. About 20 years ago, Garry Kasparov lost to IBM's Deep Blue in a very famous chess match. This was the first time that a computer outperformed a human in a test of intelligence, chess being one of the hardest games to play. At least it was up until then. And the headlines after Kasparov lost to the computer were all about how machines were finally smarter and faster and better than humans. That made for really easy headlines. There was a lot of talk about that. But the story doesn't end there. This is the part we know about. The part we don't really talk about, what happened after he lost, after he was defeated in New York City in June of 1997, was that Kasparov he went back home, and a year later, he set up the first tournament of a new category of chess, and a category of chess called centaur chess, or advanced chess. And the idea of centaur chess is the combination of a human player together with a piece of software, or an AI in today's terms. So in 1998, in May of 1998, in Leon, Spain, there was the first tournament of centaur chess. And this too is like 18 years ago. It turned out that these centaur players, these humans who were pretty decent chess players, when they started coupling with software, when they started playing together with computers against other players, well, it turns out that these players are actually better than chess grandmasters, and they're better than chess supercomputers. So instead of raising the discussion of who plays best, he reframed the entire conversation around, why don't we play together and see what happens? This still hasn't really reached mainstream. The idea of centaur chess, for some reason, hasn't really left chess circles yet. There's been a few mentions of it in technology press, but it still hasn't become the big deal that I personally think it should be. And we'll talk a little bit more about that now. So the Centaur is a combination of a human with a computer, specifically human intelligence with machine intelligence, but it can be any coupling, really. So what it does is it combines the consistency, the speed, and the precision of a computer, of an AI, of a machine, together with the creativity, the adaptability, and especially the intuition of a human player. And as it turns out, these Centaur players beat AIs, and they beat grandmasters in chess. And I want to take this principle. I really want this principle to set in, because I think this is one of the most, on a personal level, I think this is one of the most interesting insights that at least I have come across recently. And I spent a lot of time reading about these things. And I want to take the idea of centaurs. We're going to explore it a little bit more and see where it's happening and what it could mean for us. So think about this. The smartest guy in the world, arguably, is beaten by a machine and then spends sort of his time thinking about what that means for him. So you can be quite certain that whatever he came up with would be at least noteworthy. And what's happening now is you're starting to see examples of centaur thinking popping up in a handful of companies. There are a handful of places where we see this happening. Netflix does a lot of this. So perhaps famously, their first successful original series, which is House of Cards, was designed with the help of algorithms. So Netflix had, before they started doing their own series, they had tons of data on viewer preferences. They knew they knew their viewers' favorite actors, themes, topics, locations, cinematic styles, directors. All of that was quantified in Netflix's database. And the story goes that when the scriptwriters for Netflix started writing what ended up becoming their huge success of House of Cards, they leveraged all of this data, big data, I guess. And that's how they came up with politics, that's how they came up with DC, that's how they came up with Kevin Spacey, David Fincher directing. All of that was selected with the help of big data, with the help of computer information. Because we're talking about this a scope of information that is invisible to the human eye, or at least to the human brain. We're all intuitively inclined to know which directors are better than others, or which stories might be more appealing than others. But they literally leverage this data, and they put that together with their script writers, their storytellers, to come up with something that proved to be a huge success. That, to me, is an example of centaur thinking, the combination of human intelligence and machine intelligence. Another example of that is BuzzFeed. We might not enjoy BuzzFeed necessarily, but it's a phenomenon. It's interesting. We should pay attention to it. So what BuzzFeed does is everything is quantified, right? I mean, this is true in most journalistic organizations. They all look at the data, but BuzzFeed supposedly goes a lot further, and their data streams are supposedly, again, I'm not an insider, but I've read about this from the outside. They tie that into the kind of stories they'll write, to the kind of topics they'll cover. They'll use the information, what makes successful and sticky news. They'll use that to leverage to tell even stickier news. I'm not using the word good, but I'm using the word successful. And this, too, is an example of centaur thinking. They're combining the editorial eye of a journalist, somebody who has storytelling experience, with the kind of massive information, massive intelligence that would previously not be tapped in such a setting. With that in mind, we're going to do a brief exercise in the style of the first exercise, but this time you will be combining one card, with the human expertise. So in the same groups, and for the same challenge, so again, we're staying with the challenge of customer relations. Which human intelligence would you like to leverage together with the technology to come up with a centaur that would work within your organization or for your challenge? That's the exercise. You have about 10 minutes to do that. You discuss it briefly, and then go ahead and create the centaur.
Go.
Yeah, so we'll simplify. We're simplifying the end a little bit because we're losing the function. So we're doing, yes, we're changing the scribe a little bit. So it's not going to be.
There's an exercise.
We're in that one now.
And this will be group discussion.
So no scriber.
Scriber, but
Yeah.
but
It's sort of generic
Yeah, yeah,
scribing.
cool, cool,
And then we don't have to go back to the slides, I think. Because
Okay,
I
then we
can't.
just go to, okay, so you can get rid of the conclusion. We just go back to,
Just
we'll
rapid,
go to-
rapid describing, I think.
and then, well, the next thing we've got on watch, I mean, we can lose the scribing and get stay on your background, your black
Yeah.
background, and the next thing we've got is your earthquake thing, which is part of your housing.
Okay, that works.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'll wrap things up without slides. I think that's
Okay.
easier.
Yeah.
There's less going back and forth. And we'll do an open-ended Q&A.
Great. So
Okay.
describe it, go to your black background, thanks for everything, and then in closing,
Yeah.
all your housekeeping stuff.
Yeah, and then we'll wrap up and have a schedule.
Yeah. And I think
Okay.
the main thing
Yeah, keep the card. Okay, so we're wrapping. So we have only a few minutes left. So there are two pieces of instructions. One, if you're leaving now, do take the cards. They're yours to keep. And if you've noticed, if people left cards behind because they left early, then take those cards as well, because we don't want any cards left here after you guys are gone. And we're going to wrap things up a little bit differently. I know this has been a long session, so we're going to wrap things up a little bit differently. Instead of doing the debrief like we did for the first exercise, I'm sure you came up with amazing ideas, but we're not going to hear them now. So we're going to go into scribing, and we're going to do an open-ended conversation for the next 15 minutes with whatever questions, remarks, or ideas that you have after having discussed this. So anything related to the previous topics. So just to wrap things up before we move into the Q&A, we looked at 5 principles. We looked at unintended consequences. We looked at exponential change. We looked at how sci-fi becomes science fact. Then we looked at combinatorial evolution. And now finally, we looked at centaur. So there's a centaur on screen. That's awesome. So those are the takeaways for the theoretical bits. And now we'll move to the Q&A.
Thank you, Michelle. Andrew Davis, for those that don't know me, just to make some observations, if I can, from the two exercises. I think in the first exercise, from what I saw, the initial feeling and response by many people was this sense of being overwhelmed. They've got so many cards to digest, to match, to interpret and understand. But then actually, upon reflection in the second exercise, the first exercise was very easy because there was this big unknown element that was introduced in the second exercise, which was about humans and human behavior and human characteristics. And some people are saying, well, where's the stack of cards so I can interpret that as well? And so actually, like I said, the first exercise was a bit of a walk in the park by comparison, and I think that was really hard. They could easily, for the second exercise, perhaps hone in on the card, on the technology side, but that human piece was just a big black box for many people.
So with regards to your first remark about this being overwhelming, well, that's by design. So something that I realized as I do this job, which is facilitating technology thinking by means of keynotes and workshops like we're doing here, but also by means of research, there's this huge undercurrent of massive complexity that is going on. There are hundreds or perhaps thousands of technologies popping up all around us. So the idea of conveying that complexity is close to heart. It's important to get that message across, because it's something that doesn't necessarily come across if you put your message into a report, for example, or even into a book. So there's something about the format, there's something about the cards themselves, and not giving you 10 cards, but giving you 55 cards, so that there is purposefully more than you can deal with and more than you can absorb in 10 minutes. That is absolutely by design. The second remark that you made?
Well, the second remark was just about matching up to some human characteristic. And the sky's the limit on that, or where do you begin in defining what they are, because there wasn't a deck of cards representing those.
Yeah, I think that's very telling, that it's easier to work with the technologies than with the humans sometimes, because it is so open-ended, it's infinitely recombinable, the human skills and the human characteristics that we can work with. But by next time, we'll make simpler cards for the human skills, and you have to reduce yourself to one of these 3 skills. Perhaps. Questions, remarks, ideas?
In a centaur relationship, is there any evolving protocol as to who overrules what, or vice versa, if there's a disagreement between the machine and the person, the machine intelligence and the human intelligence? What if the computer wants to put pawn to king 4 or whatever it is?
That's a really good question. I think it's still the human for now. Yeah.
Just remaining on the chess analogy, one of the top 10 chess players, with the assistance of a computer, Hikaru Nakamura, played against another chess computer last year and lost that match. So in that case, we kind of reached a singularity in terms of chess computers. The computer was better than the senator. So how do you see that working in the future? I mean, eventually they will be smarter and better.
I didn't know that. That's really interesting. So if computers are now playing better than humans with computers, that is very telling about the role we play with regards to machine intelligence. Yeah, I don't have a good answer to your question other than I should definitely look into that a lot more. And perhaps adding to your point, the best chess players today really outperform the players of last decade because they've been playing against such good AIs recently. So there is a doubling effect because the human players hone their skills against computers that did not exist years ago.
Well, I think you've also proved your own point earlier that experts get things wrong because they're experts in earlier versions of the truth.
Yesterday's version, yeah. Thanks for that. Yes.
Yeah, hi, Matthew Grabois from BNP Paribas. I think it was very interesting talking about the emotional aspect, because when we put technologies in front of our people and bring them together, one of the things that is really important is to take that emotion out. The centaur is using the best person in that, maybe. But how do we make these skills combined with normal people across the organization, make them feel comfortable with these technologies to imagine out and applying them?
So how we make these technologies more approachable, perhaps? There is a tendency in technology to become more approachable over time and to become more manageable over time as interfaces improve, as ease of use improves as well. Technologies tend to start out difficult to use. They tend to start out in engineering circles, for example. Technologies rarely start out as very user-friendly because they're built by engineers, software or hardware engineers, for engineers. So to answer your question, it tends to happen over time, but it requires a lot of effort to make the technology more approachable and more user-friendly. Because if you want to design something for people who are not engineers, that's going to require a lot more effort than designing something that is for engineers. Does that answer your question? Oh, yeah.
A very interesting session, thank you. My name is Bart Pernil. We already touched on the risks of AI and AI taking over, but there may be other negative consequences, or unintended consequences in terms of security and privacy that may actually affect society at large. We may become, technologies develop and we combine them, we create something in an unintended way to be less secure actually for maybe society at large, maybe for certain groups in society, or maybe for individuals. So how should we deal about this?
How should we deal with the overarching question of privacy and personal security? You're asking all the hard questions today. How much time do you guys have? My personal approach, and I cannot speak of this at large, but I can speak of this from a personal point of view, is to become increasingly aware of what is possible in the technological ecosystem. And to sort of develop more awareness of what is happening, at least so you know which vectors of attack are possible. So a few years ago, when coffee shops with Wi-Fi started taking off, it wasn't that obvious that you should not be doing your banking from the coffee shop. It took a few cycles for that to set in. That's the kind of insight that I think is necessary. So knowing when you're vulnerable at least gives you a little bit of advantage, a little bit of an upper hand with regards to what is possible and what sort of where you could be attacked from. I don't mean that in a scary way, but more like developing that awareness will help you in your life in general because these technologies have such powerful effects. Yeah?
Actually, what this raises for me, this question, is the issue of perception versus reality. Because the reality is we have given up control of our private data already to Facebook, to Google. I mean, they know your address, they know where your kids live, they know where they go to school. they know practically everything about you. And you're quite happy giving it away because obviously the value you get from having given up this data is more than the risk to your privacy. But the perception still remains, just like for GM crops, the perception still remains it's somehow bad for you, even though it's entirely in your food value chain, you're eating it day in, day out in form of something or the other, but still you don't want to consume immediately a genetically modified piece of vegetable because you somehow feel it's bad for you. Well, if it were bad for you, you would already be dead because you're saturated with it already in what you eat. So there's this big gap between the reality where we have already ceded control to technology in all of our lives and our behaviors, but we actually feel somehow it's more threatening to us than it is in reality. I mean, do you think cyber security is any less or more secure than the old physical day when you actually signed on stuff? I mean, your signatures could be forged pretty easily. Your credit cards could have been duplicated pretty easily in restaurants. They, in fact, used to be.
Yeah.
So it's not as if it's any more scary, or it's any more unsecure. It's just that it's a lot more scary now because people understand less of it.
I agree that they go that threat and exposure go hand in hand. So we have perhaps always been exposed to risk. We cannot avoid risk. And the defense, I mean, generally speaking, the defenses tend to improve as the threat increases. Whether the end result of that means that we are more at risk or less at risk, I cannot answer. You have an expert sitting a meter from you who can probably fill me in on this.
I think for now the risks increase. I mean, in the 80s or 70s, nobody disappeared with $100 million at once, right? And sent it somewhere, another place in the world. So I think the risks have increased. In terms of privacy, I mean, of course, some of us have given up, but it's also because there is belief that there is no alternative. In fact, in the keynote before, there was a very interesting message that systems may become more private again, and we stay in control of our own devices and our own data. When your smartphone can hold 64 gigabytes of data, that's a lot. So why should your data go to the cloud? So maybe it is just a phase and we go back to more control. It's at least possible, but of course it will kill certain business models.
I think something goes to be said about the cost of privacy. We've become so accustomed to free services, which we sort of replace with our personal information, which we pay for with our personal information, that there is a natural cost to having your data private. People tend to be comfortable giving away their information in exchange for services. But in the long run, I tend to agree with your remark that there's probably going to be an increase of people who will happily pay for services that would otherwise be free in exchange for data. And I think we're seeing a little bit of that happening. Largely speaking, Apple is moving a little bit in that direction with running sort of all of their AI on the device instead of in the cloud, which means you don't have to publish all of your personal data to their servers. So there is definitely a move in that direction, but the jury's still out whether that becomes sort of a prevailing behavior, and if there's going to be sort of this counter Google behavior where people stop using Google services and Facebook services. I know I do to an extent, and I as an individual user, I experiment a lot with that. Sort of, what is it like to spend a year off of Facebook? What is it like to not use Google for a month? And it's hard. And with that, we are wrapping up. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope you took something away from this.